One week before my cheating husband lost everything in court, he was still kissing me goodbye every morning while secretly buying a house with his mistress using our savings. Every time I questioned him, he called me paranoid, emotional, exhausted. Meanwhile, he was hiding condo payments, hotel charges, and thousands of dollars stolen from the future we were supposed to build together. Then, at 10:14 on a freezing Monday morning, divorce papers hit his office. The escrow account froze, the secret house deal collapsed, and for the first time in our marriage, the man who gaslit me finally sounded afraid. My name is Sienna Vale, and this revenge story begins the moment I realized my husband wasn't just cheating on me, he was trying to erase me from my own life. Chapter 1. The envelope across the table. I used to think silence in a marriage meant safety. I thought it meant two people had been together long enough to stop filling every second with noise. At 36 years old, I finally learned silence could mean something else entirely. Sometimes it meant secrets had gotten comfortable. My name is Sienna Vale. I worked as an archivist at a university library in Chicago, which sounded a lot more interesting than it actually was. Most days, I spent my time restoring damaged papers, cataloging old collections, and sitting in temperature-controlled rooms that smelled like dust and history. I liked predictable things. Old books made sense to me. People did not. Grant Vale used to tease me about that. He would come up behind me while I cooked dinner, wrap his arms around my waist, and say I trusted dead writers more than living people. Back then, I always laughed. Grant Vale was 39 and worked as a senior tax consultant for a financial firm downtown. He wore expensive suits, checked his email during dinner, and somehow always looked tired even after a full night of sleep. We had been married 8 years, no kids yet. Every time I brought it up, Grant kissed my forehead and told me the timing was not right. First, he wanted more financial security. Then he wanted a bigger house. Then he wanted less stress at work. There was always another reason standing between us and the future I thought we were building together. We had savings accounts for everything, one for kitchen renovations, one for a larger house somewhere outside the city, another for the child I still believed we would eventually have. Grant handled most of our finances because numbers were his thing, and I trusted him with every dollar we were building together. That was probably my first mistake. The day everything changed started like every other cold November evening in Chicago. I stayed late at the library finishing a catalog update, then stopped at a small coffee shop near campus before heading home. Snow drifted past the windows in slow, heavy flakes, while people hurried down the sidewalk with scarves wrapped around their faces. I was halfway through my tea when a man stopped beside my table. "Are you Sienna Vale?" I looked up. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark coat, exhausted eyes. I nodded slowly. He sat down before I invited him to and placed a thick manila envelope on the table between us. "My name is Damian Rowan," he said quietly. "Your husband is sleeping with my wife." For a second, I honestly thought he had confused me with someone else. I stared at him, waiting for the apology that never came. Instead, Damien opened the envelope and slid several photographs across the table. Grant sitting beside a blonde woman inside the Onyx Room downtown. Grant leaving Palmer House Hotel with his hand pressed against her back. Grant smiling at her in a way I had not seen him smile at me in months. The woman was beautiful in that polished, expensive way some women seemed born understanding. Camel coat, perfect hair, legs that probably looked good in everything. Her name is Celeste Rowan. She is my wife. My chest went numb. "Grant travels for work," I whispered. Damien shook his head once. "If you move first, you lose." I finally looked up at him. What does that mean? It means if Grant finds out you know, he will erase everything before you can react. Men like him always think ahead when money is involved. That word hit me harder than the affair itself. Money. Damien leaned back slightly and lowered his voice.
He will delete messages, move accounts, change passwords, maybe even convince people you are unstable. You need evidence before you need emotion. I hated how calm he sounded. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not interested in a scandal, he said. I'm interested in winning. After he left, I sat there staring at the photographs while my tea slowly turned cold. Outside the window, people kept moving like nothing had happened. Somewhere in the middle of all that noise, my marriage quietly collapsed. On the train ride home, I started replaying the last 5 months in my head. Grant changing his phone passcode, Grant suddenly taking his phone into the bathroom every morning, Grant turning his screen face down every time a text appeared, Grant going to the gym 3 nights a week, even though his clothes never smelled like sweat afterward. One night while Grant showered, I picked up his tablet from the couch. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I had barely touched the screen when I heard the bathroom door open. Panic shot through me. By the time Grant walked into the living room, I had already pulled up a recipe website and forced myself to smile. "What are you doing?" "Trying to figure out something different for dinner this weekend." He nodded distractedly and grabbed the tablet without another thought. That hurt more than suspicion would have. Around 2 a.m., I sat alone on the bathroom floor, staring in my reflection under the harsh vanity lights. I looked exhausted, smaller somehow. Then I opened Damien's envelope again. This time I noticed something I had missed before. In the photograph outside the Onyx room, Grant's wedding ring was gone. That was the moment everything inside me finally turned cold. The hardest part wasn't the affair, it was realizing another woman was already standing inside the future I thought belonged to me. That night, I stopped trying to save my marriage. I started preparing for war.
The strange thing about betrayal is how normal life keeps looking while you are falling apart inside it. The morning after I found the photographs, Grant walked into the kitchen adjusting his cufflinks while I stood at the counter making coffee. He kissed the side of my head and asked if we needed milk. I remember staring at him thinking I could never trust my own memories again, because this man had once loved me. I knew he had. Nobody could fake 8 years that well. But now every ordinary moment felt poisoned. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing how carefully Grant managed his attention. His phone stayed face down on every surface. He answered texts with a private smile before locking the screen the second I looked up. And he was gone constantly. Late meetings, networking dinners, weekend client events, the excuses changed, the pattern did not. I kept playing my role because I did not know what else to do. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, sat beside him on the couch while he scrolled through his phone, pretending another woman was slowly moving into our marriage. The strange thing about betrayal is how lonely it becomes long before anyone actually leaves. A week later, we drove to Naperville for dinner with Grant's parents. His mother, Diane, hugged me the second we walked through the door. "You look pale, sweetheart. Are you sleeping enough?" "She works too much," Grant answered for me. Then he touched my back gently, like a caring husband, and walked inside carrying the wine. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and followed him into the dining room while Harold complained about taxes and Diane asked whether we had thought more about children. Grant squeezed my knee beneath the table. "Someday soon," he said casually. I nearly stopped breathing because suddenly I realized he had probably already said those same words to Celeste. That was what hurt the most. Not the sex, not even the lying. It was knowing another woman had somehow stepped into the future I thought belonged to me. On the drive home, Grant rested one hand on the steering wheel while rain hit the windshield in soft, steady waves. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Long week. You should take a few days off. Maybe we could go somewhere after tax season." The concern in his voice sounded real enough to make me hate him for it. 3 days later, Grant mentioned another networking dinner downtown. I tried to sound casual. "What restaurant?" "Someplace near the river." "Why?" "Just wondering." The second he left the apartment, I grabbed my coat and followed him downtown.
Chicago was freezing that night. Wind cut between buildings hard enough to sting my face while I stood across the street from the Onyx Room trying to convince myself to leave. Then Grant stepped out of a black town car beside Celeste Rowan. She looked perfect. Camel coat, dark hair, effortless in a way that made me suddenly aware of every tired part of myself. I crossed the street before I could stop myself. The restaurant windows glowed gold against the snow outside. From where I stood, I could see them clearly. Grant smiling at her, really smiling, not distracted, not exhausted, alive. Inside the restaurant, Grant pulled out Celeste's chair. He poured her wine. He leaned close when she spoke, like the rest of the room had disappeared. Then dessert arrived. Grant fed her a bite from his fork while she laughed softly and touched his wrist. A few seconds later, I saw his left hand resting on the table. No wedding ring. For a second, the entire room blurred. Snow gathered on my coat while I stood outside watching my husband behave like he was already married to someone else. Not cheating, replacing me. I drove home shaking so badly I almost missed our exit. Grant came back just before midnight smelling of expensive cologne and winter air. I was already in bed, pretending to sleep, when he walked into the room. Then I heard the sound. Metal against wood. He had taken his ring from his pocket and slipped it back on his finger again. A minute later, he climbed into bed and wrapped one arm around my waist. His hand rested against my stomach while I stared into the darkness, trying not to cry. The next morning, I started digging. Quietly, carefully. Receipts inside jacket pockets, parking stubs from garages near Evanston, luxury wine purchases, hotel charges disguised as business expenses. One afternoon, while Grant showered, I searched the pockets of his wool coat hanging near the front door. I found a receipt from a furniture store in Northbrook, leather sectional, dining table, bedroom set. Almost $9,000. My stomach dropped. They were not paying for hotel rooms anymore. They were building a home. Then the shower turned off. Panic hit me instantly. I shoved the receipt into my sleeve just as Grant walked into the hallway drying his hair. "What are you doing?" "Trying to figure out why Mariano's charged me twice for coffee creamer." Grant laughed softly. "You and your receipts." Then his eyes stayed on my face a second too long. "Is something wrong with you lately?" I forced myself to shrug. "Just tired." After he left for work the next morning, I sat in my car outside the library parking garage, staring at our savings account on my phone. At first, the numbers didn't make sense. Transfers I didn't recognize, large withdrawals, furniture payments, weekend hotel expenses, money disappearing faster every month. The account we built for kitchen renovations was nearly empty. The future baby fund had been touched too. I sat there gripping my phone while tears blurred the screen. If Damien was right, I could wake up one morning and find every account drained. Grant was not just cheating on me, he was financing another life with our future. That afternoon, I met Rebecca Sloan in her downtown office overlooking the river. She listened quietly while reviewing the statements I printed. "You need to understand something, Sienna. Men who cheat emotionally usually cheat financially too." I swallowed hard. "What happens if he starts moving money? Then we move faster than he does." Rebecca explained hidden transfers, dissipation of marital assets, emergency restraining orders, and evidence chains while I scribbled notes with trembling hands. "If Grant realizes you know before we're ready," she said calmly, "every shared account could look very different by tomorrow morning." A week later, Grant stood beside me in the kitchen drinking coffee while scrolling through emails on his phone. "You know," he said casually, "maybe we should sell this place next year." "What?" "Simplify things, maybe move downtown for a while, fresh start." Then he smiled faintly. "The future looks different now." In that moment, I finally understood something terrifying. Grant was not planning a new beginning. He was planning my erasure. By then, I understood something dangerous about secrets. Once you finally saw them clearly, you started seeing them everywhere. 3 days after our conversation in the kitchen, Damien Rowan met me at the university library just before closing time.
Snow drifted past the tall windows as students packed backpacks around us, laughing about finals and weekend plans, like the world still made sense. Mine did not. Damien carried a dark leather folder tucked beneath one arm. He looked exhausted in the way people do when anger has been keeping them alive too long. We went downstairs into one of the archive rooms where nobody would interrupt us. The air smelled faintly like dust and old paper. Usually, I loved that smell. That night, it made me feel trapped. Damien placed the folder on the table between us. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. Something inside my stomach tightened. Ethan Cole, former Chicago PD. Expensive, but thorough. He opened the folder slowly. The first photograph showed Grant entering a luxury condo building in Evanston with Celeste beside him. The second showed them carrying grocery bags together. The third showed Grant unlocking the condo door while Celeste stood behind him, smiling up at him like she belonged there. I stared at the timestamps beneath the photos. Tuesday night, Thursday evening, Saturday morning. Every gym night, every fake networking dinner, every time Grant kissed my forehead before leaving the apartment, saying he would not be home until late. He had never been going to the gym. He'd been going home to her. I leaned back in my chair and covered my mouth for a second, because suddenly every memory from the last year felt poisoned. Damien gave a slow nod. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. There was something strangely intimate about sitting across from another person who understood your humiliation perfectly. No explanations, no pretending, just shared damage. Finally, Damien rubbed one hand across his jaw and looked down at the table. I thought Celeste was lonely, he admitted quietly. Turns out she was just somewhere else. That was the first moment he sounded hurt instead of angry. He opened the folder again and spread several financial records across the table. Parking receipts, restaurant bills, condo payments, furniture invoices. I stared at the numbers until they blurred together. Grant had spent thousands building another life while telling me we needed to delay kitchen renovations because money was tight. He had watched me clip grocery coupons while buying another woman marble countertops and lake views. Then suddenly, my phone buzzed loudly against the table. FaceTime from Grant. My heart nearly stopped. Immediately, Damien closed the folder while I grabbed my phone and forced myself to breathe before answering. Grant appeared on the screen, sitting in his office downtown. "Hey, you still at work?" I glanced at Damien sitting silently across from me. "Yeah, archive cleanup." Grant smiled faintly. "You should come home early tonight. Feels like I barely see you anymore." The irony hit so hard I almost laughed. "Maybe," I said softly. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. "You okay? You look tired." For one terrible second, I thought he could somehow see everything written across my face. I forced myself to smile. "Long day." Someone called his name off screen and he looked away immediately. "I'll see you later," before ending the call. The second the screen went dark, I lowered the phone slowly onto the table. Damien exhaled quietly. He has no idea, does he? I shook my head. No, but people like Grant always seem to know when control is slipping. Damien stared out the archive room window at the falling snow. They usually panic when money is involved. Then he handed me another document. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Pharmacy receipt, pregnancy test, prenatal vitamins. The address printed at the top belonged to the Evanston condo. The room suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Grant had spent years postponing conversations with children with me. Not yet, maybe next year. Things are complicated right now. But apparently, things were not complicated enough to stop him from building a future family with someone else. I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I need a minute." I barely reached the restroom before everything inside me collapsed. The second the door shut behind me, I grabbed the sink hard enough for my hands to ache.
Another woman was already standing inside the future I spent 8 years waiting for, not just sleeping with my husband, replacing me completely. I covered my mouth, trying not to make noise as tears blurred my vision. A minute later, the restroom door opened. Nora Bennett from administration stepped in, holding her phone. Sienna? I turned away fast. Hey. Her forehead creased immediately. Oh my God, are you okay? I forced myself to nod. Just a migraine. You look awful. The honesty almost made me laugh. I'm fine, just stressed. Nora studied me another second before finally nodding. You should go home early. But I already knew home was the last place I wanted to be. When I returned to the archive room, Damien was standing beside the table staring down at another set of papers. There's more, he said quietly. Of course there was. He slid bank records toward me. $65,000 transferred from Celeste's private account into a joint account she shared with Grant. I stared at the numbers. What is this for? Damien's jaw tightened. A house. That single word hit harder than I expected. Not hotel rooms, not hidden dinners. A house. They found a place in North Shore. Closing date is in a few weeks. For a second, all I could hear was my heartbeat. Grant was not planning an affair anymore. He was planning his exit strategy. Damien reached into his coat pocket and slid a sealed envelope toward me. What's this? $100,000. I stared at him. No, it's not charity. His voice stayed calm and steady. It's strategy. I looked down at the envelope without touching it. If Grant freezes your cards after the filing, you need options. Apartment, lawyer, protection. I hated how right he was. The next week, Rebecca Sloan met with both of us in her office overlooking the river downtown. Legal paperwork covered the conference table as snow battered the windows behind her. We file simultaneously, she explained. No emotional confrontations, no warnings. What about the accounts? I asked quietly. Rebecca's expression hardened. We freeze everything before Grant has time to move the money. The tension inside me grew worse every day after that, because now there was a clock attached to my marriage, a closing date, an expiration date. Then one night, Grant made a mistake. He left his tablet syncing with our shared cloud account while showering. I almost ignored the notification. Almost. But when I opened it, photographs filled the screen. White suburban house, black shutters, large kitchen, open staircase, backyard patio. Then came the documents: accepted offer, escrow instructions, closing timeline. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the tablet. If I waited any longer, Grant would not just leave me, he would walk away with the future I spent 8 years helping him build.
Chapter 4: Monday Morning War. After that night, everything became about timing, not grief, not heartbreak. Timing. The final weekend before the divorce filing moved with the kind of quiet tension that makes your body ache, even when nothing is happening yet. Grant walked through the house completely relaxed, convinced he still controlled every piece of my life. Meanwhile, I was learning how to leave without warning. Saturday morning, I met Rebecca Sloan downtown to sign the final legal paperwork. Outside her office window, the river looked gray beneath heavy clouds, while traffic crawled through slush-covered streets below. Rebecca slid another stack of documents toward me. Emergency financial restraints, asset freezes, divorce petitions. I signed every page with shaking hands. Rebecca watched me carefully over the rim of her glasses. You still have time to back out. I let out a small laugh that sounded tired even to me. There's nothing left to save. After the meeting, I walked 3 blocks through freezing wind to open a private checking account under my name alone. Rebecca insisted on it. If Grant panics after the filing, he could freeze every shared account immediately. That sentence stayed with me the rest of the day. By Saturday evening, I had scanned years of financial records onto encrypted drives, packed a black duffel bag with enough clothes for 2 weeks, and signed a lease for a small apartment in River North. The entire process felt unreal, like I was secretly preparing to escape a collapsing building while the man responsible sat comfortably inside it. Grant spent most of that weekend distracted by his phone. Sometimes he smiled at messages without realizing I noticed. Her. Always her. Saturday night, he ordered pizza and stretched out beside me on the couch while a basketball game played in the background. At one point, he tossed his phone onto the cushion beside him and leaned back with a relaxed sigh. "The future looks good," he said casually. I turned toward him slowly. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know. Things just feel different lately." Different. That word settled heavily inside my chest. He had no idea how true it actually was. I forced myself to smile. Maybe different isn't always bad. Grant grinned faintly and kissed my forehead before turning back toward the television. For a second, I closed my eyes. The tenderness still hurt more than the affair, because some part of him truly believed he was still a good husband. Sunday evening, everything almost collapsed. I was upstairs organizing legal paperwork into a storage box when I suddenly heard the garage door opening, nearly 2 hours earlier than expected. My entire body locked up instantly. Grant. He was supposed to be having dinner with Celeste. Panic hit so hard my hands nearly stopped working. I shoved the paperwork into a red Christmas decoration box beside the closet just as Grant's footsteps started climbing the stairs. "Sienna?" My pulse hammered violently. "In here." Grant walked into the bedroom, loosening his tie. Dinner got canceled. For one terrible second, his eyes drifted toward the open closet, where the corner of my River North lease agreement still stuck out beneath tissue paper. I moved sideways immediately. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just cleaning." Grant looked at me carefully for a moment too long. Then his phone buzzed. Everything about his face softened the second he saw the screen. Celeste. I knew it without seeing the name. That tiny distraction saved me. Grant slipped the phone back into his pocket and rubbed one hand over his jaw. "I'm exhausted. You should get some sleep." He nodded absently and disappeared into the bathroom, while my knees nearly gave out beneath me. That was the moment I realized something dangerous. Grant was so certain of his control over me that he never even considered I might fight back. Sunday night, I barely slept. Grant way beside me, breathing steadily, while I stared into the darkness, replaying every detail of the plan over and over inside my head. Rebecca files at 8:30. Freeze the accounts immediately. No confrontation, no warning, no mistakes. At 4 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs into the kitchen. The house felt painfully quiet. I stood there staring at the white cabinets we picked together years earlier, the framed wedding photo near the hallway, the staircase where Grant once carried me upstairs after too much champagne on our anniversary. Every memory suddenly felt staged. Monday morning arrived cold and colorless. I made pancakes because Grant loved pancakes on Mondays. The normalcy of it felt almost cruel. Grant walked into the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks while coffee brewed beside him. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." He stepped behind me and wrapped one arm around my waist before kissing my cheek softly. For a second, I almost broke, because some part of him truly believed he was still a good husband. Grant grabbed his keys from the counter. "I'll probably be late tonight." "Of course you will," I thought. Out loud, I only smiled. "Drive safe." I stood at the front window watching his car disappear down the street. The second he turned the corner, I grabbed my phone and called Rebecca. "He's gone." Her voice stayed calm. "We're filing now." Everything moved fast after that. Rebecca waiting outside the courthouse downtown. Damien sitting silently beside his attorney. Me sitting alone inside my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. At exactly 10:14, my phone exploded with incoming calls. Grant. Again. 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 Then finally a voicemail notification appeared. My hands shook when I pressed play. "What the hell did you do?" For the first time since I met him, Grant sounded afraid. Another call came seconds later, from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Celeste was screaming so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You ruined everything!" Then the line disconnected. A few minutes later, Rebecca called again. "The escrow account is frozen. Joint accounts, too. The North Shore deal collapsed." In the background, I could hear voices echoing through the courthouse hallway. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "Their realtor has already called twice. Grant tried accessing one of the shared accounts. He can't touch the money." For the first time in months, I was no longer the woman waiting to be abandoned. Grant was finally the one losing control. That afternoon, I returned to the house one last time. The silence inside felt different now, dead. I carried my duffel bag upstairs and paused inside the bedroom. Grant's watch collection still sat neatly beside the framed wedding photo on the dresser. I touched the edge of the frame lightly before turning away. Downstairs, I rested my hand against the kitchen counter we once planned to renovate together. Then I picked up my keys and walked out the front door without looking back. River North felt loud after years in the suburbs. Sirens echoed somewhere below, while snow drifted between glowing apartment windows high above the street. My new apartment was small and mostly empty. One bedroom, bare walls, half unpacked boxes. Temporary. But the second I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, something inside my chest finally loosened. I kicked off my shoes and sat down on the hardwood floor in the middle of the empty living room while city lights flickered outside the windows. Then I cried. Not because Grant destroyed my marriage, not because another woman nearly stole the future I spent years building. I cried because for the first time in almost a year, I did not have to perform anymore. The marriage had ended long before that morning. Monday was simply the day I finally stopped carrying it alone. Chapter 5. The Silence After the Storm. For the first few weeks after the filing, Grant kept trying to contact me like repetition alone could undo what he had done. Calls, emails, voicemails at 2 in the morning, some apologetic, some angry, some sounding so exhausted they barely sounded like him at all. By February, the divorce proceedings officially began downtown, inside a courthouse that always smelled faintly like wet wool coats and burnt coffee. Chicago winters have a way of making everything feel gray, even revenge. Rebecca Sloan handled the case with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning. Watching her work felt like watching someone slowly dismantle a building brick by brick. Grant sat across the courtroom from me, looking thinner than I remembered. His expensive suits hung differently now, like he had lost weight too quickly. The confidence that used to fill every room around him seemed smaller somehow. Not gone, just cracked. Celeste attended the first hearing beside her attorney, wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors. Even from across the courtroom, I could see the exhaustion on her face. Good. Rebecca presented the evidence carefully. Condo lease agreements, restaurant charges, furniture purchases, travel expenses, shared bank transfers, escrow paperwork tied to the North Shore property, a timeline showing months of hidden spending connected to the affair. The evidence stacked higher and higher, until even Grant stopped trying to look at me. At one point, Judge Evelyn Harper adjusted her glasses while reviewing the financial records, in silence. Then she looked directly at Grant. "Did you use marital funds to build a future with another woman while still legally married?" The courtroom went completely quiet. Grant opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely small. Not charming, not persuasive, not in control, just small. Judge Harper's ruling came several weeks later. Grant had dissipated marital assets. The court ordered reimbursement for affair-related spending, 60% of the proceeds from our home sale, and full payment of my legal fees. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder after the hearing ended. We got him. But victory did not feel loud the way I once imagined it would. It felt quiet, peaceful. Outside the courthouse, people rushed through the freezing wind carrying umbrellas and coffee cups, while reporters crowded around another high-profile case near the front entrance. Grant stood alone near the elevators, staring at the marble floor. At one point, our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. Celeste's life unraveled almost as quickly. Damien's attorney activated the infidelity clause buried deep inside their prenup agreement. Within weeks, she lost access to shared accounts, luxury memberships, and the suburban house she and Grant planned to buy together. The condo in Evanston was gone by spring. Friends stopped seeing them publicly after that. Turns out, secret relationships become much less romantic once lawyers and financial disclosures get involved. No more expensive dinners, no more hidden weekends, no more adrenaline, just debt, resentment, embarrassment. According to Damien, Grant and Celeste started blaming each other almost immediately after the filings. She accused him of ruining her future, he accused her of pushing him too fast. Apparently, betrayal only feels exciting until consequences arrive. One afternoon, Rebecca forwarded me a settlement update from Grant's attorney. Attached was a recent financial disclosure statement. I stared at it longer than I should have. Grant had moved into a smaller apartment near Schaumburg. The luxury condo plans were gone. The accounts that once made him feel untouchable looked painfully average now. For years, I thought I was the weaker person in our marriage. The divorce showed me something different. I was simply the honest one. The final hearing ended in early May beneath cold spring rain that turned downtown sidewalks silver beneath the streetlights. When I stepped outside the courthouse, Grant was waiting near the stairs, with both hands buried inside his coat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, he looked at me. I made a mistake. I stared at him quietly. No, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is buying the wrong birthday gift. What Grant did required planning, lies, choices repeated over and over. You built another life behind my back, I said softly. Rain tapped quietly against the courthouse railing beside us. Grant swallowed hard. I never wanted things to end like this. Men always say that after consequences arrive, never before. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. The sharp confidence that once made him attractive now looked tired and hollow. Then he asked the one question I think he genuinely believed might save something between us. Can we still be friends? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. I don't become friends with strangers. Something in his expression finally collapsed after that. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quiet defeat. Then I walked away. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I moved into a small cottage near Lake Geneva where mornings smelled like pine trees and cold water instead of traffic and concrete. The university promoted me to head archivist after my department director retired unexpectedly. Most mornings, I drove to work before sunrise, with coffee balanced beside me and music playing softly through the speakers. The silence in my life no longer frightened me. That surprised me more than anything. I planted yellow tulips outside the cottage that spring because Grant always hated yellow and once called it an irritating color. Now, the kitchen walls were painted soft gold. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me again. Damien and I still met for coffee occasionally whenever work brought him into Wisconsin. Nothing forced, nothing pretending to be romance. Sometimes we sat in silence without needing to explain anything at all. That was enough. One evening in early autumn, I sat alone on the back porch wrapped in a blanket watching the lake turn orange beneath the setting sun. The air smelled like rainwater and fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a boat engine echoed briefly before fading into silence again. Real silence, not the silence that used to exist inside my marriage while secrets slowly poisoned everything underneath it. This silence felt different, safe, peaceful. For years, I thought losing Grant would destroy me.
Instead, it returned me to myself. The affair destroyed my marriage. The truth saved me. And maybe that is the strangest thing about survival. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you becomes the first honest thing you have felt in years. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you thought would stay forever, I hope you remember this. Starting over is terrifying, but staying inside a lie slowly destroys you in ways you don't notice until it's too late. And if this story stayed with you tonight, let me know in the comments. I read more of them than you probably think, and if you enjoy revenge stories like this, stay a while. There are always more secrets waiting to be uncovered.